Good evening and welcome to the Job Search Solution, the radio program where we talk about looking for a job, jobs, changing careers, hiring. And as always, we begin with a prayer. Dear God, grant us thy peace and thy mercy. Thy will be done. Had a listener request us to go over the top 10 mistakes that candidates make in interviewing. So if you're in the interviewing process, pay attention. The first mistake people make is they forget that an interview is a selling situation, that they are selling themselves to a prospective employer. Never mind what the employer can do for you, we'll get to that, but what you can do for them. And probably the biggest mistake is that people don't ask for the job. I have 4 basic questions that you need to ask in every interview, and you need to find out what those are. People think that an interviewing situation is a two-way street. I hear that probably daily. Well, it's a two-way street. That's ridiculous. It's not a two-way street till you metaphorically get to the altar. Then it becomes a two-way street. Until then, it's you versus 150 other people that are trying to get that job. Don't worry about what a company can do for you. People have a tendency to focus on what they want in a job. I had a candidate the other day that halfway through the interview pulled out a list of things that she wanted in a job. No. The employer doesn't care what you want. The employer cares what they want. Now, the employer might care what they want, what you want, after you give them plenty of good reasons of why they ought to hire you and what you can do for them. Then they might consider what you want. But until then, don't even bring that stuff up. It's not even an issue. You're selling yourself on why they ought to hire you and what you can do for them that the other people can't. Candidates often don't know what they're really selling to an employer. Well, I'm just a good worker. I'm just a really good worker. I'm a good worker. Oh yeah, I'm a good worker. I've always ranked in the upper 50% of the people that have been rated. I'm a good worker. And they never really get specific about what makes them a good worker. Why are they a good worker? And how can they prove that they are a good worker? Now, this takes some thought. You got to prove your track record. You got to know what you're selling. And you've got to be able to articulate it and give examples of where you've been, what you've done, and how well you've done. You can't just go in and say, well, I'm a good worker. You got to be able to prove it. Candidates can't articulate or bridge for the employer their specific abilities. You've got to get, if you're a candidate, a really good idea about what the employer is looking for. And then you've got to bridge what you've done in the past to what the company is looking for and put that and articulate that in terms that mean something to an employer. If you've been successful in your past jobs, that's great, but you need to be able to articulate what that means to the prospective employer in terms that are meaningful to them. And if you ask enough good questions, then you're going to get that. It'd be like a basketball player going in to interview for a football job and talk about all of his basketball skills instead of talking about his or her athletic skills and how they carry over to the prospective employer. And you've got to articulate that and bridge that for the prospective employer. In other words, you got to do a lot of their thinking for them. Poor communication skills. It happens at least once a day. Candidates don't look people in the eye. They don't articulate. And I deal with salespeople. You'd be shocked at that. They don't articulate, and they hem and they haw and they and they act like they're not used to answering the right kind of questions that the employer's asking because they don't practice. This takes practice. Like any other sales presentation, it takes practice. People have improper dress. Body language is unprofessional in the interview. I had a candidate wear a sunsuit the other day, a sundress to an interview. The employer was shocked that the lady came in a sundress and sandals. Her attitude was, well, it was real expensive stuff. The sandals were really expensive. It's a job interview, for goodness sake. Poor dress, not preparing for it. And in these days of casual dress, candidates don't wear a coat and tie, dark suit, white shirt, blue shirt in the interview. Always overdress in an interview. When you come back for the second interview, you can change your dress. Body language is poor. This takes practice. Slouching in your chair isn't going to get it. Not researching the company or the position they're interviewing for. I had a candidate the other day that went into an interview and basically said what you got. Hadn't done any research on the job, hadn't done any research on the candidate, on the company, hadn't done any research on the person they were interviewing with. What you got? Oh my goodness. It ended right there. The inability to articulate what they would like in a new job or a company. Now, I'm not talking about money. I'm not talking about benefits. I'm not talking about PTO. I'm talking about the intrinsic value that you want in a job, how you are personally as a candidate going to grow. And you need to articulate that in a couple or three sentences. Just somebody ought to be able to wake you up at 3 in the morning, and you ought to be able to articulate what kind of personal growth you're going to get out of a job. And then the last issue is people badmouth their present or past employer. Don't do that. Anything you say about an employer you've worked for before, you're going to say about the present employer you're interviewing with. And they know that. Do not badmouth anybody ever. All right, stay tuned. This is Tony Bashara with the Job Search Solution.